All right, everybody, let's talk about some hormones. Okay, so hormones are molecules. They are molecules that act as a messenger. And so there's always some cell that produces the hormone, and this cell will secrete that hormone generally into a blood vessel. So as this hormone travels through the blood, it will do one of two things. It will either attach to a cell surface receptor on a target cell, and that'll cause some series of changes to happen inside of the cell. There's all kinds of things that this could trigger a cell to do. You're going to learn about some of them as we do some specific examples of some specific hormones. But some of the hormones will leave the blood vessel and then travel straight up into a cell and enact some sort of change on the inside of the cell. So they don't actually do the job itself. They don't actually do the change, but they are a molecule that when it attaches to or comes into a cell, causes a change to happen. Now, there's a couple of things that these hormones will do. One of the things that hormones do is they may maintain something called homeostasis. Now, homeostasis, the start of that word homeo, if you kind of get rid of the E, you get the word homo, which means same. And homo, meaning same, it kind of helps you understand what homeostasis means. And the definition of homeostasis is keeping a constant internal environment. Think about like some of the things that you need to keep constant in your body. Like, for example, your body temperature needs to stay at about, somewhere between like 36 and 38 degrees Celsius. That's going to be anywhere between 95 and maybe 98 degrees Fahrenheit. Your body needs to keep a constant carbon dioxide concentration in your blood, which is why sometimes you'll breathe more rapidly if carbon dioxide is increasing in your blood. Your body needs to keep a constant level of blood glucose. There's some specific units for this, but we don't need to worry about those. You need to keep a constant blood pH, like that's a level of acidity or basicity in your blood. And your body needs to keep a constant water balance. That's why you pee more when you have a lot of water in your blood, as opposed to when you don't, and you'll pee less. Now, your body maintains this homeostasis through a process called negative feedback. Now, I know your first instinct when you hear negative feedback is to say that it takes away something. But taking away something isn't always the case. Sometimes adding something is important for this particular process. So you got to get that out of your mind right away. So what negative feedback does mean is negative feedback is a response that reverses. Am I misspelling things today? A response that reverses a change. And you can kind of think about it like your thermostat at your house. Your house, you set your thermostat to, 70 degrees. If the house gets too hot, the air conditioning kicks on to cool it down. That's the reverse of what happened. The house got hot. That was the change. And the response is the air conditioning comes on to reverse that. Alternately, if the house gets too cold, the heat kicks on to reverse that change. And your body does a very similar kind of thing. So take your body, and your body needs to stay, I don't know, about 37 degrees Celsius. If your body temperature gets too hot, your body does some stuff to try to reverse that. For example, you sweat. For example, your blood vessels will dilate, which is why your skin starts to look redder, and you start to release some of the heat from your skin until you get back to 37 degrees Celsius. Alternately, if your body gets too cold, you will start to shiver. Those are little movement lines there. You will start to shiver. You may notice that when you get cold, your skin gets a little paler. That's because your blood vessels will thin or constrict so that the blood isn't as close to your skin and kind of keeps it into your body. So I could write down paler here as well. Until you get back to what temperature again? 37 degrees Celsius. That's right. So this is called negative feedback. Negative feedback. So this is one example of how that works. There are two hormones that actually work together to make this happen with respect to your blood glucose. So let's do blood glucose as an example for how your body maintains homeostasis. I just realized I wrote the wrong word up here in my notes. That's terrible. This is negative feedback. Sorry for all of you pen writing note people. All right, so let's just do a quick reminder here. Let's remember that glucose is needed inside of your cells to do cell respiration. And in the process of cell respiration, you produce ATP. Now, there's going to be times when you need more glucose and times when you don't need as much glucose. When you're sleeping, you don't need a lot of glucose. When you're exercising, you need a lot of glucose. When you're eating, you're putting a lot of glucose into your blood, and you've got to get rid of all that. Extra glucose in your blood is not that great. It causes a hypertonic environment, which means that there's a higher concentration of glucose in your blood, which means there's a lower concentration of water, and that could cause some osmosis problems. It also will, sometimes these glucose molecules will agglutinate, which means that they will bunch up and group together and cause little blockages, and you don't want that to happen. And so, in order to regulate your body's glucose level, you have what are called antagonistic hormones. And these are hormones that work opposite of each other, just like you have antagonistic muscles to make your breathing go in opposite directions as well. These two hormones are called insulin. You already knew this one. And then another one called glucagon. Okay. Now, hormones, remember, get secreted from a cell that produces it. And the cells that make this are both found, that make these hormones, are both found in the pancreas. And the cells that make the insulin are called beta cells. These are in the pancreas. Specifically, they're in an area called the islets of Langerhans. And glucagon is made in alpha cells, also in the pancreas. Now, if you flip back to your digestive system notes, you'll see that the liver, one of the things the liver does is it takes extra glucose out of the blood. And so that's going to come into play in this particular case. Okay, so let's take our blood glucose levels. So we have our normal blood glucose level. Let's see, I have that written over here somewhere. That's somewhere between 75 and 95 decigrams. I'm going to I'm sorry, not decigrams, it's deciliters. Let's erase that. Okay. It's milligrams per deciliter. Milligrams per deciliter. So deciliter is like a kind of a weird little thing. That's like a tenth of a liter. Now, you have no idea what this looks like. That's just a number. Not needed to be memorized or anything, but that's the level that your blood sugar should be normally at. Okay, so let's do a little feedback loop here, okay? So let's say that your blood sugar level gets too low. Maybe because you were exercising or something like that. Your cells used up a whole bunch of glucose, and they took that glucose out of the blood. Now your blood sugar level is too low. So what happens is the alpha cells in the pancreas will release glucagon into the blood. Now, glucagon is the hormone. Now that glucagon then travels to the liver, and it stimulates the liver cells to do something. And what it stimulates the liver cells to do is, remember that glucose is stored as glycogen in the liver. And glycogen are chains and chains and chains and chains, very highly branched chains of glucose. And that glucose is broken down. That glycogen is broken down into glucose. Glucose concentration, that's a C, that's like an abbreviated concentration. Glucose concentration in the blood increases until we get back to our normal level that we should get to. So up in here in this picture, this is like this right here. We've got our glucagon being secreted from the cells in the pancreas. They go in your blood, travel around till they get to the liver, where they trigger something to happen inside the liver, and the liver uses some enzymes to break down the glucose from the glycogen, which is then released, all that glucose, and is now released into the bloodstream. That's when it gets too low. Now, what happens if it gets too high? If it gets too high, and let's say it gets too high because you just ate a big meal. Instead of the alpha cells producing and releasing glucagon, the beta cells produce and release insulin. Produce and release insulin. Now, the insulin travels through the bloodstream, and there's a couple kinds of cells that will take it up. There are adipose cells, and adipose cells is another way to say a fat cell, just a cell that's like full of a bunch of fat. And adipose cells will take in that extra glucose and store it in there. Liver cells will also do this as well and store that extra glucose as glycogen, until eventually the glucose concentration in the blood decreases, and we get back to normal. So this is an example of how some hormones do negative feedback. Now, you're also familiar with people that have to inject insulin into their blood because they have diabetes. Remember that there's two kinds of diabetes. There's type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is generally genetic and occurs in your early years of your life. And this is because your body doesn't produce insulin. Or you may not produce enough insulin. And sometimes this is happening because the beta cells were destroyed by your immune system, which is really, really, really bizarre. So these individuals need to inject insulin into their body in order to reduce their blood sugar level. Because remember, blood sugar level is not good. It does these terrible things from up here. Type 2 diabetes is often referred to as late onset as a result of poor diet, lack of exercise, and things like that. And in this one, you produce insulin. You still produce the insulin, but body doesn't respond to the insulin. So the body doesn't respond to the insulin. This is a problem because that means that all that extra glucose is just floating around in your blood. Let's throw a couple of vocab words up here. These cells here that respond to the change are called effectors. Because they are the ones doing the response to the change. So they are the effect to the cause. But your body also has to detect these things. And so there are cells that detect when your blood sugar is too low or too high. And these cells are called receptors. And your body has lots of receptors all over the place. Your body has cells that can detect carbon dioxide concentration and your temperature and your blood pH and your water balance. Your bodies have all of these receptors that are all over the place. Okay, so if there's a negative feedback, there's also a kind of positive feedback. Now, positive feedback works a lot differently. And so maintaining homeostasis is normally done through negative feedback. But sometimes the change that needs to happen isn't to go back to normal, but to take something and magnify it. So number 2 over here is positive feedback. And positive feedback reinforces a change. And reinforcing a change means that you take whatever that thing that's being detected is, and you make it bigger. For example, childbirth. In childbirth, you have to take some normal uterine contractions and you have to make those contractions bigger and bigger and bigger in order to push the baby out of the body. Lactation, the baby latches on to the nipple to breastfeed, and that causes the body to produce more milk. The baby keeps drinking, so the body produces more milk, and the baby keeps drinking, and the body produces more milk. You're taking a change and you're reinforcing it. You're making it happen more and more and more and more. Okay? So these are big changes in the body. Big changes in the body. So let's see here. So let's do that as an example. All right. So let's take a baby growing inside of a uterus. You better not say that that baby's growing inside of the stomach. You weird cannibals. Okay, so there are stretch receptors that get activated. That causes the brain to release a hormone called oxytocin. That oxytocin is a signal to contract uterus muscles, which causes the stretch receptors to be activated, which causes the brain to release oxytocin, which causes the uterus muscles to contract, which causes the stretch receptors to be activated, which causes the brain to release oxytocin, which causes the uterus muscles to contract. And that cycle goes on and on and on and on until finally the baby gets delivered. And when the baby gets delivered, there's no more stretch receptors being activated, and as a result, the whole process just stops. So you're taking a response and you are making it bigger. All right, so after watching this video, you are going to learn about 3 other hormones, and you're going to answer some questions in your notes. Those hormones are 3 new hormones. Those hormones are thyroxine, leptin, and one that many of you are probably familiar with, melatonin. Not melanin, melatonin. 2 totally different things. Some of you might take melatonin at night to make you sleep, and you're going to learn a little bit about that today. So, then tomorrow we're going to learn about those 4 hormones that are involved in the menstrual cycle and how those work together and feed back on each other to make the menstrual cycle happen. All right, take it easy. Stay safe.